We're happy to have you join us as well as our special guest. And I want to start by going over just a few ground rules. We have muted your microphones. If not, please mute yourself. And please turn off your cameras to prevent any issues during the video playback. Feel free to ask your questions in the chat box. And at the end of the video presentation, we will have a Q&A with our panel. With that, let's begin the video.
Asia, can you see the video or my screen is sharing properly?
Yes, you're good to go, Jolene.
Okay, let's get started.
Our statement is our Green New Deal Coalition proposes to create thousands of good jobs, family-sustaining jobs, while addressing the climate emergency and restoring Virginia's environment. And our efforts will address two of our biggest crises, which are climate change and inequity.
So to begin, what is the origin of the Green New Deal Virginia, and what is its story?
I saw these young activists in November 2018 rise up after Democrats regained the House of Representatives and stormed the Capitol demanding, elections are great, we came out to vote, but now we demand some action, especially as we approach the various crises that we have. And so I was inspired and contacted some of the leaders in the Sunrise Movement and said, how can we bring that energy here to Virginia? They said, well, we're not operating at a state level, but we would love to see if we can help. And so I began to make contact with a variety of organizations. And then by December 2018, we had launched a Green New Deal Virginia with a coalition of a variety of organizations across the Commonwealth that are fairly intersectional, the faith community, environmental community, social justice advocates. And so I contacted my friend Elizabeth Guzman and I said, Guzman, I've got all this stuff, we're ready to go. I'd love for you to launch this with me. It'd be great.
Actually, Delegate Sam Rasul approached me back in 2018 and asked me to be the chief co-patron of the resolution first when he was first introduced in the House of Delegates. And as soon as the session was over, we were trying to get different stakeholders to be part of this movement. So he reached out to me. I told him, yes, I would love to participate. And so it was our job to get more organizations involved. And that is how we now have like dozens of grassroots grassroots groups that are part of the Green New Deal Coalition.
And then in January, I wanted to, once we had the initial launch, and as things were gaining traction, we went from 9 organizational partners to close to 30 pretty quickly, and now it's grown well beyond that. I asked my friends, Karen Camplin and Lee Williams, hey, it'd be great if Green New Deal Virginia was not completely tied to just legislators, because we're just straight politicians. And I want to be here every step of the way, but I'd love for you all to consider co-chairing it as members of the Sierra Club and the NAACP. And I thought that represented a great intersectionality, and they graciously took it on and have done such a great job in a difficult environment, building a coalition, pushing forward a legislative agenda, and here we are today.
Do you have a personal story that's led you to do this work around the environment and climate change?
But I was a hugger for the Special Olympics. I went on to become a nurse. I was very care-oriented my entire life. Had children, been very humanitarian-oriented. What's good for the common man, not the select few. And that could be environmental issues for people, environmental issues for animals, but health, well-being, quality of life issues for all of our living creatures. And of course, I got out of, so I was raising my kids and I got more involved in my Episcopal church. I learned that there was actually something called creation care in the Episcopal church, and how, God has told us that we need to be caretakers of this earth, that we don't hold it, we're not in dominion over anything, but that we are here to be stewards and caretakers. And that really resonated with me. So Green New Deal is the perfect fit for me because it encompasses, our themes encompass everything that I feel passionate about in one big big circle?
I am a planner, and so I've worked with a lot of community development and transportation projects, and I've seen the negative impacts that these projects can have on a community, whether it's impacting their economic vitality, whether it's introducing toxic facilities into their neighborhoods, and also seeing how it manifests itself in terms of health issues, or helps to exacerbate poverty and all of these horrible living conditions, and also decreasing quality of life. And so I wanted to do something that would be impactful. I started doing outreach and advocacy work with the Virginia State Conference NAACP as the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee Chair. And then when I was approached and I was told about the tenets and the philosophy of the Green New Deal, I just saw how it perfectly aligned with what I thought should happen within our communities. And so I just started working on the Green New Deal Virginia.
Yeah, so I've been a practicing attorney for about 35 years, and all of that time has been in the labor movement. In the last 21 years before I retired, I was with the United Mine Workers of America Health and Retirement Funds, which provides health and pension benefits to retired unionized coal miners. So I have a personal connection to what I think is the central thrust of the Green New Deal program, which is that we need a just transition to a green economy, but we need to do it in a way that leaves no worker or community behind. And this includes our sisters and brothers in the fossil fuel industry, as well as those in the emerging green energy sectors. So that's really has been my life's work, to work to strengthen the union movement. Part of the problem that I've seen over really a lifetime of activism is that those who are opposed to our aims, to the social justice movement aims, try to put us in our silos, try to create what the media likes to call interest groups. So you have the women's groups over here, and the civil rights organizations over here, and the labor organizations in another place. And the idea is an old idea. It's divide and conquer. And that's what keeps people weak. And I think the strength of the Green New Deal program is it's a fight for intersectional justice. It says that we need to get everybody out of their silos, and people who traditionally think of themselves as environmentalists should fight for labor rights. People who are involved in the labor movement should fight for civil rights and equality. And then we all need to be fighting as one unit, because it turns out, as a matter of fact, that the same people who are denying that there's a climate emergency are the same people who are trying to bust unions, are the same people who refuse to do anything about police brutality, they're the same people who maintain an unjust criminal justice system in the United States. So these are all intersectional problems, and they demand intersectional solutions. And that's really why I've chosen to spend my time working with Green New Deal Virginia, because that really is the essence of our message.
We now have over 70 different groups part of us, and we are non-traditional grassroots organizations as well as larger established groups. So this idea of a coalition of people linking arms, and all of our mutually beneficial interests would be supported under our themes. And we were kind of like a roughshod group at first. We just got to know people and built our coalition that first year in 2019, and then had a summit in April of that same year. And it was a powerful day of brainstorming and developing who is Green New Deal. And out of that came 5 themes from our original 4 and working groups.
I got started with this work mainly because of the Atlantic Coast and Mountain Valley pipelines. Seeing the racism and colonialism and classism that pipelines like that perpetuates, and also being a mother of 2 little ones who I want to see them and all kids have a future on this planet, I decided I had to do everything I could to stop unjust projects like this. Through my work around the pipelines, I saw that it wasn't even close to being only environmental. There's so many other intersecting issues, and the Green New Deal Virginia is a coalition that is seeking, not only to address pipelines and harmful projects like that, and to address climate change, but it's also addressing the intersecting issues of economic, social, and environmental justice, kind of to craft a better future for Virginia as a whole. So.
I started working in political activism because I felt a call to service. Growing up, I was always taught to pay everything that you have given, that has been given to you, forward to someone who may not have as much as you do. And in the social climate that we live in, it became more and more clear and more apparent that because of who I was and where I am from, I had clear advantages that other people do not. And the intersectionality between climate justice, economic justice, racial justice, and social justice are so important to understanding how we can create that just and sustainable society for the future. And honestly, at this point in time, you can't have one without the other. So that is why I'm committed to helping the Green New Deal be successful, because while it is a very bold initiative, I do feel that it's probably the most important piece of legislation that we could pass right now here in Virginia.
I went to school at Tennessee State University in Nashville, Tennessee, and it was a case dealing with environmental injustice and racism in this town where the water was contaminated, and they found out that that part of the town, it was like how most towns are, was segregated, still is today for the most part, and the town's water was contaminated, but what was happening was the white residents were notified. They were told not to use drinking water, not clean with it, not drink with it, and the black residents weren't. So you had this whole case of where the black families had cancer and were dying, and the white residents, they had ailments, but it wasn't as bad. And it turns out, they found out that the county had pretty much decided, who lived and who died. So when I found out about that case and I got involved, that just kind of got me down the rabbit hole of finding out that, environmental justice wasn't just an issue that just affects the polar bears, which was kind of like my thinking back then. It didn't really seem like something that affected everyday people. So that's what initially got me involved in the fight, just seeing it up close and personal. That in a lot of negotiations, especially policy-wise, people of color who look like me generally aren't at the table, and there's always saying, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So I felt like it was important to make sure that marginalized voices that you normally don't hear about or who normally aren't represented when legislation and when matters like these are discussed was there. So I want to make sure I was part of that.
Government. Politics is a very weird and dirty place, but to be able to affect change in such a significant and major way in a lot of time, very short amount of time, if you do it right, usually, is government. It is you better the quality of people's lives with a stroke of a pen. And so I've always been one to tell folks, Edwan is my name and governance is my game, because the goal of what we do is not for the power or the celebrity or the victory. It's literally to do the one thing it's meant to do, which is better the quality of people's lives. Climate change is the biggest issue that we have faced at this present moment, outside of all of the other atrocities that we have going on, of course. And doing it in a very collective way to where we address everything at once was such a beautiful process to me. And once we started looking at it from that perspective, that's when Bakura brought me into the Green Deal. Specifically the Social Justice and Health Disparities group, because it was a way for me to focus really bettering the quality of minority class communities I live in and that I work in, and be able to actually do it in a holistic way when we're talking about a giant change of something like a Green New Deal.
Basically, for most of my adult life, I've been working on something on the spectrum of social justice, community development, and the ecosystem, environmental things in different ways, from being an organic farmer and teaching other people to farm organically, to doing political advocacy, to being a political candidate. But it's all been driven by the same desire to just build a better world that works better for people, works better for communities, and works better for the ecosystem. Kind of the elusive challenge that many of us pursue. So Green New Deal work is a logical extension of that, the work that I've been doing for 40-ish years, because it brings those pieces together. reason that I'm working on the Green New Deal is because I see some potential to put it forth in a way that farmers, loggers, fishermen, rural people might embrace it.
Went to the University of Virginia for engineering and such in an energy field, and then worked in industry, in the energy field for a long period of time, as a regulator, as an engineer, as a training professional. Then decided that, hey, I want to try and save this planet, and one community at a time. So I started the Center for Sustainable Communities, which is all about making communities greener, cleaner, healthier, safer, and more climate resilient. And we do that through an equity and environmental justice lens. So I was an early pioneer in this work a long time ago, but before it was so popular, and bore some of the hits and stripes, of early racial prejudice in this field, which really took its toll in a number of ways on many of us. But now we're doing the Green New Deal, but then how do you take care of an entire planet, which I think is my purpose in life. Well, you'll find platforms that will eventually get you there and such. And doing great policy, doing great legislation, which has a statewide impact and sometimes a national impact as well, is one way of doing that. So I signed up for the Green New Deal, crashed a party at the first conference because I don't think I was invited. And there was some secondary meetings and such, and I got on a panel there with the Green New Deal as well at the first conference, and begin to just get engaged and involved.
I worked with both Bank of America as well as with Wells Fargo for a number of years, and I did a lot of work with the wholesale side of their bank, which is kind of a really narrow area, but it's basically they've got a banker's bank side where they provide services to other banks. And so we were doing a lot of application development work with them. And I kind of felt like I was in a real niche in that space. And then lo and behold, the 2008 crisis hit as well after I left IBM. And I got to thinking about credit and what it is, and I started exploring that first with local currency, and then looking at bank credit. And I met Ellen Brown, who did a number of workshops that I was part of. And anyway, we founded the Public Banking Institute as a result of that relationship. As a country, we have over $2 trillion. I think it's approaching $3 trillion dollars in infrastructure needs at this point. And Virginia has a chunk of that. The Green New Deal will address that. And a public bank will be a really effective, low-cost way of delivering financing for that piece of the infrastructure development, so that taxpayers are not paying through the nose for building out infrastructure.
In 2009, I lost my father to lung cancer. And that had a really big impact on me, as I'm sure it would for most people, or I would hope it would for most people. And for me, it made me really kind of question what I wanted to dedicate my life to, and how I could serve the world better. And so it was kind of at that point that I did a bunch of research. I had grown up within sight of a coal-fired plant, which undoubtedly was a large contributing factor to not only my father's death, but also my own struggles with upper respiratory issues throughout my life. And, so I started doing research after I lost him, and was wishing that there was some way to get rid of coal, that we wouldn't need it. And in the process of doing that research, I realized that there's actually an abundance of renewable energy resource available, and all we really need to do is tap it. And so, after doing a lot of soul searching, I decided to leave a very good job at one of the world's largest securities companies. I lost my fiance as a process of that decision. Decided to kind of venture out on my own and try and do what I could to transition the world off of fossil fuels. As Virginia is a purple state, and I wanted to live in a state where my vote could maybe have an impact on the upcoming election. And I really want to vote to make sure that Trump gets out of office, that we have a new president this term, and that's really important to me. So I decided to locate in Virginia so that I could get my vote to count, basically. And so, as you know, while I'm here, since I'm going to be here until just after the election, is when my lease is up, I decided to try and get out there and you know, share my knowledge as a banker and an energy professional and an environmentalist with people here and see what I could do to help the state.
I have worked in climate since 2011, and in probably 2016, I got very, very involved with the whole notion of really controlling what oil and gas and fossil fuel companies do. So I was involved at the federal level with creating a moratorium on fossil fuels. So when I heard that they were going to do a Green New Deal in Virginia, I was very, very interested. I'm also on Senator Sanders' Green New Deal working group as well. So I work with the, I guess, national organizations that formed to say this is what we need to see in Green New Deal legislation, and that it was important that it not just narrowly focus on climate, that it be expansive and broad and look at everything that relates to climate, corporations, and people's social and economic justice, that we start looking at things as a whole rather than individual pieces not related to anything else. Climate is related to everything else.
So I've always been interested in conservation, but then I did see a climate reality presentation in 2018, and I knew right away that I wanted to be involved. And I went to the very next training that they offered and got involved, which is where I met Karen Camlin and of course you, Natalie, and learned about the Green New Deal. And I realized that these incremental changes are not enough. It's got to be a big change. It has to be meaningful, powerful legislation that is needed, and that is what the Green New Deal offers. That I feel like it's the most meaningful avenue to get real legislation passed. That you know, it counters the climate crisis, the, you know, economic crisis, environmental justice concerns, all of it wrapped into one. That is the Green New Deal.
But I didn't really become an activist until much later in life. First, locally here in Loudoun County, we were going to consider becoming the first non-tidal county in Virginia to adopt the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance. And then a couple years after that, I screened Bill McKibben's premiere of Do the Math. And that was such a compelling documentary that, along with other people that saw the premiere, we formed 350 Loudoun. So one thing led to another. I was trained as a climate reality leader last year. And so Green New Deal is definitely up my alley. So I like the Green New Deal Virginia because it is so comprehensive. It takes a big view. It literally puts people first. And that's so critical, especially today with the pandemic.
Focus of the Defossilization, Energy Efficiency and Renewables Working Group is overall a just, fair transition to a carbon-free Virginia. And that would be through a moratorium on all new fossil fuel and similar fuel projects, and switching to 100% renewable energy powered electricity for Virginia by 2036, and also strengthening our energy efficiency goals in the state. And doing all of this, emphasizing that it be a just and fair transition by keeping the intersecting issues of environmental, social, and economic justice at the forefront of all our policy.
So right now, what we are working hardest to do is really just give back what the working class rightfully deserves. And I want to make sure that labor is a part of the environmental conversation, since they aren't normally. And you know, climate justice and economic justice go hand in hand. And we need to make sure that all the stakeholders are part of that. And one very important part of all of this are the people who are, making these renewable energy projects a reality and actually constructing and maintaining them.
Housing measures, and what we mean by that is, like, for example, safer communities, but also even with things like criminal justice, making sure that there's fair housing and that we're giving people second chances and that we're actually being, again, fair and equitable to the most vulnerable in our society. And also, we discussed jobs as well, making sure that people have access to green jobs, but having living wages and things of that nature. So those have been some of the main objectives we've really been honing in on.
Broadly speaking, the mission of our working group is to simultaneously improve opportunities for farmers and rural people, better livelihoods, better incomes, better return, while enabling them to use the most ecologically restorative or regenerative practices possible, so that it's not constraining or pushing farmers to do things that they resist because you're trying to preserve the environment, but we're trying to come up with solutions that enable farmers to actually be more viable, more profitable, to thrive, and other rural entrepreneurs, but do it in ways that helps to balance the carbon imbalance we have, that helps to address climate change and other environmental problems.
We're about lessening those emissions. We're about changing communityscapes and cityscapes, to be more sustainable and equitable and just, and also we're looking to innovate and create in this space as well.
Broadly speaking, what we hope to have happen is for public finance to be rethought here in Virginia, and to incorporate both public-private partnerships as well as public banking as key entities for public finance going forward.
The objectives of our working group are to finish the work that we began on voting rights. So Virginia has come so far. We now have early voting. We never had early voting before. And our early voting, we are one of the earliest states of the 50 states to begin early voting. We start on September 18th. That is absolutely thrilling. The other thing that we've been able to do in Virginia is we rolled back photo ID. These were all things that we had in our previous legislation that we wanted to see done. We still need to do more work around restoration rights.
The objective is just to educate people and to reach out to different types of organizations and different people and learn about how legislation within the Green New Deal could benefit them, and to also to listen and to understand the issues that different people are facing, to be sure that when we do come up with legislation, it is all encompassing and we're covering, everyone's needs as best we can. And yes, educating is why we need it, and what the solutions that it can provide.
Our job is to help communicate the objectives of the Green New Deal to all audiences, including the general public, legislators, other coalition members, just so that we have a fundamental understanding of what the Green New Deal Virginia is. So I'm very excited to be working on this working group, because personally, I think that knowledge is lacking, and people often get it confused with the Green New Deal National, which, we are different.
Everybody's going to benefit from Green New Deal. Whether you're a resident, whether you're a student, whether you're a farmer, whether you're a single mother, whether you're a family of four, and most importantly, the state as a whole will benefit. Our businesses will benefit as well. We are in support of an economy in which everyone can be able to participate. Now, with the Green New Deal, for instance, we're looking at it not just as how do we improve the path to being able to have access and utilize clean energy, but how do we have ownership of of those types of things? How do we remove the barriers for returning citizens to get access to funding or educational resources and able to either become an entrepreneur and start their own business, or be able to become to have access to, you know, quality paying jobs? So, you know, when you look at our list of our coalition members, we try to have everybody at the table, even if you don't sign on to the Green New Deal.
We've tried to emphasize justice in all our policy in a way that no community is left behind. So all Virginians should benefit from our policy goals, and that would be especially environmental justice communities and transitioning workers who would be the most impacted and historically have been the most impacted.
To start, all working people, especially those in rural and economically disadvantaged areas, will be benefiting from the initiatives that we're working on. Not only that, but the work that a lot of these union jobs produce can be enjoyed by all Virginians. You know, the more union jobs that we have working on renewable energy, the cleaner our water and our air will get. The more union jobs we have working on transportation and infrastructure, the better connected we can be between communities, and the better that those people have more access to more economic opportunity that they might not have in their area. Or, you know, the more union jobs we have in the trades, the more we can develop better sustainable school buildings, hospital buildings, and expanding our housing affordability. With those projects comes jobs, and jobs attract more people to come into these areas to live, patron local businesses and restaurants, giving an overall economic stimulus that many of these places have been needing for years. And with that kind of stimulus, then you're talking about how those tax dollars you're attracting now can go into investing in public education, repairing the local infrastructure in that area, and just giving the overall area a relief, while also combating climate change and giving people access to cleaner air and cleaner water. And to me, that's pretty incredible when you follow that path and that progression, that all of these things, just because you started attacking one issue, are now affected in a positive way.
You know, really poor marginalized people in general are the ones that we want to make sure are seeing the most benefit out of what we're doing.
Primarily Virginians, because it would be the Virginia Green New Deal, but Virginians, every single member of this Commonwealth is going to be a beneficiary of that. Whether it be because of the cleaner air, whether it be because of the expansion of transportation, whether it be because of the guarantee, the job guarantee, or the healthcare guarantee, or the well-paying jobs along with it, the advancement of technology that comes along with it. There's so many benefits across the board for everybody.
If we were to meet the mission of the working group, farmers would be the most direct beneficiaries, but rural economies and rural businesses broadly, and consumers. And then, of course, everybody benefits if by raising our food, we're restoring the ecosystem and reducing emissions and the climate imbalance rather than contributing to it. Then the whole planet benefits at this point when soil is managed in a healthy way.
So who will benefit? Everyone will benefit. And even those unborn generations will benefit as well. Okay, because we're looking at this through a sustainability lens. And that means that we're preserving the future while consuming in the present. Such that these generations can have the same benefits that we have, even better.
One is to provide much more value for taxpayer dollars, because the cost of financing, the cost of public finance is going to be going down. And then the second thing that we're providing is the ability for people to achieve their goals, to achieve what they want for the state of Virginia, whether it's protection from the sea rising or floods or whatever it may be. Much of that can be funded with a more robust public finance approach that we're bringing to the table.
We will have good family-sustaining jobs for everyone who wants one. And we will give families the flexibility to be together instead of tag teaming their children as one parent runs in the door and the other one runs out. That's my biggest hope, is that the families will have more time to be families than they are right now. Young families are struggling with 2 or 3 jobs, and they don't see each other to be families.
If the Green New Deal passes, I think Virginia would be a much better place, both economically and environmentally. Ensuring a just transition like that, which was seen in the Green New Deal Act, would bring thousands of better paying jobs. It would result in cheaper energy bills for Virginians. And it also would do a lot for the health of Virginia communities by simply preventing polluting fuel infrastructure from being built and harming communities' air and water. And ultimately, it'll also allow Virginia to do its part in trying to avoid the worst impacts of climate change.
So Virginia will be cleaner, greener, and more equitable if we enact all of the Green New Deal here in Virginia and all of its tenets. So if everything comes together, we'll have more people employed, more people with longer lasting employment and better pay. And, our communities within Virginia are going to be, economically advantaged to a point that they have not been before in a long time.
Our main goal is to make sure that we're at least putting measures in place where we as Virginians can take care of ourselves even more so, and where the help from the federal government will be a supplement, where we're not necessarily relying entirely on the federal government, although we recognize that a lot of help is going to have to come from the federal government, because there's certain things that states we just don't have enough money to do on our own, but we want to at least make sure that we're allocating our budget in such a way that we're not where we're putting our resources, i.e. our budget and our budgetary funds, towards programs that are helping people.
We'll have a greener and cleaner economy, an economy much less dependent, eventually not dependent at all, but in the middle, much less dependent on dirty sources of energy, fossil fuel sources of energy. We'll have homes, community buildings, commercial buildings that are dramatically more energy efficient, because that's an absolute key to both fighting climate change, but also to enabling people to live better, because an energy efficient building costs a whole lot less to heat and cool. So the building stock will be much more energy efficient. People will have lower bills. Their homes will be and buildings will be more valuable, and will be putting less emissions into the air. It's tough in a big state like Virginia with rural areas, but hopefully we'll have considerably more access to low emission mass transit, particularly trains, that can take us from far Southwest Virginia to Richmond, to Nova and beyond, and then within our towns and cities. Certainly that kind of a low emission transit system that isn't dependent on individual cars will be enormously important. And I think we'll be able to get the basic things that people use every day from more sustainable sources, and from farmers and foresters and loggers and fishermen and women who use sustainable practices.
I'm driving down 64. I look to my left, I see an EV. I look to my right, I see an EV. But I'm in my autonomous vehicle as well.
What I envision is the governor, as well as a few other elected officials, would be the governing board for this public Bank of Virginia, and the Bank of Virginia would rather quickly step into the role of helping to do deals, finance projects, which have historically been underfunded. And so I see that being happening rather quickly with prudent. With a prudent approach, but the organizing entity can be the Bank of Virginia.
I think initially, once it passes, all there will be that's different is hope, right? We'll actually have hope of a better future. It takes time to go from policy being implemented to projects happening and transitions happening. But 10 years from the Green New Deal Virginia Act passing, I envision a world where Virginia, where people are driving electric cars, where manufacturing is shifted to electrified processes as much as possible and away from fossil fuels, and where we're using 100% electricity to power those processes and power those cars, and where there are a bunch of new jobs and people are working in jobs that they can be proud of without risking their health. and good paying jobs too, not stuff that is paying a bare minimum wage where people can barely get by, but good jobs that they can, provide for their families. And so that's the world that I see for Virginia.
When the Green New Deal legislation passes, number one, we do establish our moratorium on fossil fuels. We have mandatory renewable portfolio standards. And we now have really addressed our health disparities. So people that are in communities where they have suffered the impact of fossil fuels, they are able to get the health care that they need and their children need. And they're beginning to get healthier because we are no longer poisoning their air and their water. We will also see our rural areas begin to heal because we are no longer attempting to push toxic substances through those areas.
So when the Green New Deal Virginia passes, I'm going to be so happy to see that all Virginians will have access to clean air, to clean water, and to healthy food, to good jobs. It's just going to be a better life for everyone, not just a select few. So that's why I'm so happy to be working on the Green New Deal Virginia, because people, no matter where you live or what color your skin, the Green New Deal is going to take care of you. And that's what is so inspiring and helpful about the Green New Deal Virginia.
When I think about the Green New Deal Virginia passing, if we consider a moratorium on fossil fuels, the stopping of pipelines through the Commonwealth, all of these people who have been impacted by the Mountain Valley Pipeline are now protected to have their land restored, peace of mind restored, and transitioning away from dirty fossil fuels and into clean renewable energy, better jobs for everyone, equal just transition away from the fossil fuels. It's like you said, everything is covered and it feels clean and it feels hopeful.
Our group would love for folks to reach out to their legislators to determine their legislators' stance on Green New Deal policies and to urge their support of these policies, and also to let us know how their legislators are responding. And we also encourage folks to reach out to their networks and their allies as well, to educate them on Green New Deal policies and to have them reach out to their legislators as well.
Right now, it's mostly that we need to raise awareness around labor issues. The labor movement has been growing, but doesn't get nearly the amount of attention that it needs to. So what I'm asking people to do, or for people who normally don't get involved themselves in these labor issues, is to get in the conversation and off of the sidelines. Call your Virginia state legislators to tell them to repeal right to work. Tell Congress to pass the PRO Act. If we have a mass movement of working class people, as we have seen that's been building over the past few years, we can easily make these ideas a reality. But it's not just enough for a small group of people to be the ones standing at the front and talking about it. It needs to be a lot of different people from all aspects of life that really need to be the ones carrying the banner for this.
Just really researching what's already on the books so that when we're proposing policy that we're not being redundant. So that's really been what we've been working on more so recently, and just tightening up on the nitty-gritty details.
But I think the thing that we need help with the most is making sure that we get the right policy, like getting it right without the unintended consequences. I think that's what we need help with, is like somebody to play devil's advocate around the unintended consequences that could take place with a policy that's this big, and what's something that we can miss that even the minds in the room don't think about.
We need more help, broadly speaking. We need more capacity, but particularly we need more farmers and perhaps some rural business people to join us.
So I would say some of the smaller administrative tasks.
We are hoping to have legislation that will create more oversight in the elections, rural electric cooperatives, where we will end proxy voting. We will again be working for restoration of rights. Again, we're going to need 2 successive constitutional amendments and then a public referendum. We will be looking to expand voting hours even a little bit more than they are. I want to make sure, oh yes, campaign finance reform.
We do have 2 committees. One is the Education and Events Planning Committee, and then the other committee is the social media. So that social media encompasses a lot, including the visual arts. You know, we want to be able to send messages that are very easy to grasp and understand, and that's where art really comes into play. So,
so we can always use help in various ways. Like you said, inviting us to come and talk about the Green New Deal is very important. Also, if you have editorial writing skills or artistic skills, we would always welcome those also. Or if you're just interested in learning more and you want to become more involved, we would love to have you join us. There's a place for everyone.
More one, I think we would love to have your information. So we do have a webpage, and you can participate in all of the events that are going on statewide. We would like for you to learn who your representatives are. And you can do that by going to our webpage that is called Who's My Legislator in Virginia. And it will tell you who is your local elected official, your state elected official, your representative in Congress as well. And they will give you right in there their contact information. So I would say reach out to your elected officials and tell them, what do you support the Green New Deal?
You know, there are some of the easiest things that we can talk about, of course, putting a lot of pressure on your state legislators and on the executive branch to really understand the importance here, doing some proper education with regards to the intersectionality. But what really needs to happen beyond that is to continue to build a coalition, reach out to various organizations. If you feel as though you're a Green New Deal champion, when you see that there is an organization or an entity or a person that's pushing for social, racial, economic justice, and otherwise reach out to them and say, how can we help you? How can we put our heads together and try to make some progress together? I think that is a critically important piece. And
was that we have the capacity to solve these problems. And that is really a lesson for those of us who've been working very hard on the climate emergency front, that these, when we're told we don't have the money to do this and we don't have the, that we can't get buy-in from people can't change their behavior to really solve the crisis. We find that turns out not to be true when the world is faced with a global emergency, a pandemic. Most of the world, including most people in the United States for that matter, have responded in a way to change their behavior, to fight for solutions that really benefit people. So I find that inspirational even in the midst of such difficulty that once again we learn that humans have the capacity to do the extraordinary if we choose to do so.
We know we can do it. We just have our leaders lack the political will to do it. There's too much money to be had doing it the old way. And let's be frank, the system is fixed. It needs to be broken. Yeah. And we need to break it and rebuild it as a just, equitable society for all of us.
Now, what do we want? Green New Deal. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? Green New Deal. When do we want it? Now.
What can you do right now? Sign up for a working group at bit.ly/GND Voices. Also, contact your state legislators and urge them, 1, to support a just transition to 100% clean renewable energy by 2036. 2, to enact a fossil fuel moratorium with worker protections. 3, to repeal right to work. And 4, to support policies that give more worker protections in the renewable energy sector. Finally, join the movement and go to www.greennewdealva.com.
Okay. Wasn't that fantastic? Ooh, I gotta turn my video on here. Sorry about that. Just a huge shout out to our tech team for putting this video together, and to the whole education and outreach team for interviewing all of our great panelists who are with us tonight. So let's jump right into the Q&A. I've got a couple of questions I'm going to start with. If you have more questions for the panelists who are our Green New Deal leaders and our working group leaders, please go ahead and put those in the chat, and we'll do as many as we can in the time we have left. So the first question we have here is, what is the plan for building resiliency to sea level rise, recurrent flooding, and worsening storms in waterfront communities and Eastern Virginia? Many times communities are left on their own or worse, given mandates without necessary funding. Any of the panelists can jump right in.
This is Stacy, the chair of the DEAR group. In the Green New Deal Act, there is a climate action plan that it's going to be developed and then approved with a citizen input process, so that community members can input into this climate action plan, and it should address all aspects of climate change, which would include the resilience of coastal communities and many other things like agriculture, other impacts of climate change, like droughts across the Commonwealth, etc.
Awesome, thank you so much. So our next question here, HB 77 definition, clean energy means energy efficiency, energy conservation, demand response, energy storage, and energy derived from solar, offshore wind, onshore wind, offshore wind, geothermal, and ocean tidal sources. But all of these generate potentially huge volumes of waste, broken, outdated, depreciated technology, etc. Some will be toxic waste. All waste is polluting. What communities will bear the burdens of this waste? The cities who need the most energy, or rural areas where most of Virginia now dump their mountains of waste? Where this waste goes is an environmental justice issue of great concern.
I think I'll jump on in. This is Sam Rasool. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for that question. It is very important because justice has to be intersectional, and that's why we can't have a climate action plan as we put this thing together and leave out anyone. I'm glad that Matt and others have talked about the economic justice that has to happen here, and as we build this plan, make sure it's done in a just way. I'll give you a great example of how difficult the Green New Deal Act is to actually enact. So you've heard of the census, and when the census is taken, the census is broken down into what's called census tracts, and census tracts have been roughly 5,500 people. This breaks environmental justice down into what's called census blocks, a much smaller piece. And 50% of the workers that are going to benefit from a Green New Deal Act must come from these census blocks. And so we're going to be identifying, you're pretty much going around and identifying almost neighborhood by neighborhood that need to be lifted up. And that's the kind of justice that needs to be very intentional. And that means, I saw in some of the questions talking about rural versus urban areas, there are poor areas and areas that need to be lifted up, that it would be environmental justice communities and census blocks in rural areas and in urban centers as well. So it's about leaving no one behind. But specifically to your point, there was one question that many people asked about, what does this look like as we move forward? I don't think that we ever quite get there, because to me, the real justice is a journey. And to me, that's the fun part about all of this, that there is this evolution that's got to continue to occur. And just as we produce these solar panels and install the battery storage technology that can revolutionize the way we store some of that energy, this is a very serious question. Then what do we do as that evolves out? We've got to make sure that we come up with a just way of approaching that. And that's the hope of putting together a comprehensive climate action plan, where we ask people from all across Virginia to come together and see what that plan might look like.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question, the goals are admirable. What are the specific policies?
I can speak for the DEER group. We're going to be working on our two flagship bills this year will be a new version of the Green New Deal Act, which I'm grateful to Delegate Rizul for sponsoring again this year. And then we'll also be working on a standalone fossil fuel moratorium bill with strong worker protections. And I'm happy to announce that that has a sponsor with Delegate Jennifer Carroll Foy. So those will cover the policies for the DEER group.
Yeah, and if I could just follow up for the sustainable jobs and labor, obviously the number one thing that we have to do, and it's what we've been trying to do for years now, which is repealing the right to work laws here in Virginia, so all of our workers can have the right to organize and get their ability to have a seat at the table during bargaining. Something we have, for our public sector workers right now, which has been great. And the fact that they definitely need it now, but as we have seen, what an essential worker is has gone beyond just the public sector. I mean, our retail workers, our grocery store workers, our healthcare workers are all in the line of fire right now with this pandemic, and they need protections. And the only way they can do that is through unionizing. And on another note with the unionization of things, this is something that I hope to, work with a lot of people who are working on renewable energy projects, is that right now, unfortunately, and this is just the case, most of the renewable energy projects have the worst wage theft out of any project that there is. And that's because they're trying to make their bottom line. What we do with that is introducing responsible contractor language within these projects through the zoning and permitting process, whether that be solar, whether that be wind, and getting those jobs able to be trained through certified union apprenticeships, so that those people are not just getting the jobs, they're getting extended contracts onto further projects and getting the pay that they need mixed in with the benefits. So it's not just creating jobs, it's creating sustained careers for these workers. And that goes hand in hand with unionization. And that all starts with repealing the right to work laws. So we are going to be working on that in this upcoming session, and we'll be pushing that bill hard once it's introduced.
Do we have any of the other working group leaders who'd like to respond to that question?
Can you please repeat the question for me, please?
Sure. Just what are the specific policies?
Okay, for the social justice and health disparities work group, we have a couple. One is definitely removing barriers to jobs. What we have seen is that a lot of people are very qualified to do certain work. However, if they have the presence of a criminal background, they're prohibited from, let's say, owning a business or working in a certain field. And that is forever, for the rest of their lives. And so we have a policy initiative which will remove those barriers. Another one is to remove the bar. So once you if you commit a crime, you'll be either classified, you'll have your scarlet letter as either a misdemeanor or a felon for the rest of your life. We don't feel that is equitable. And so what that says is that you can never be redeemed, and forgiveness will never be upon you. And so we want to remove that scarlet letter. It's terms to it that you have to be of good behavior for a certain amount of time and things like that. And then it falls off. It's just like a driving record. If you have a certain amount of points within a certain amount of years, it falls off. We think that is important, especially in times where people are not able to get gainful employment, and that we're still actually paying people adults $7.25 an hour that have families. So those are two of our most important policies, and it also opens up the door to be able to get housing, to start your own business, and other opportunities that we think that people really want and need to be able to thrive.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, our next question is multi-pronged here, so I'm gonna try to break it up a little bit. House Bill 77, Environmental Justice Community, means a census block in which many residents are predominantly minorities or low-income individuals. Since many census blocks in rural Virginia will meet this definition, has the Green New Deal Virginia started identifying, mapping these census blocks? Would knowing which these are help focus public awareness of benefits in my census block, and particularly so in rural communities who have for very long been left out of economic development, high unemployment, poor or no broadband, high proportions of aged and child poverty. So I'll stop there with that. We have any takers?
I'll just piggyback on some of my earlier comments because I think that is a wonderful question. Green New Deal Virginia has not gone through and identified each census block. So you've got the census tract, 5,500 people, then you have a census block group, and within the census block group are census blocks themselves, and you're identifying neighborhood by neighborhood. And I think that's a wonderful idea to try to figure out how to target neighborhood by neighborhood who would be uplifted in a lot of this work. Just thinking about how difficult all of this work is exactly the intentionality we have to bring, I think, fighting for this intersectional justice. Not only 50% of the workers have to come from these environmental justice communities, but about 40% of the investments must go into those environmental justice communities. So think about that. We can't just rely on super expensive windmills that are going to be off the coast. These investments have to, many of them have to occur in those communities to uplift them. So I think it would be a great idea as we think into the future to identify specifically those blocks. And I hope that the individual who asked that would help us want to dive on in and do exactly that.
Awesome. And Delegate Rasool, you did a great job by addressing the second part of their question. Okay, so moving on here. This Green New Deal is entirely focused on humans. Is there a working group to address the animal and plant kingdoms that need to have biodiversity and migration corridors protected while all the structures for renewable energy production are displacing them?
I like to jump in with the social justice. So with social justice, we don't leave anything out when we're talking about it. However, I do recognize that it was not included specifically in our policy, and we need to include that because so oftentimes when we write policy and don't have the words in it, then it's excluded. So thank you for that question. But we would like for every ecosystem to be able to thrive within the social justice and health disparities. Health disparities are not contained to humans. Our animals, our trees are all in jeopardy with the climate crisis and sea level rise. And so we are aware that, we have an issue with extinction of certain animals, and we want to include all of those ecosystems in social justice and health disparities. You can't have social justice and leave out animals, mammals, plants, and all of those type of things. So thank you for that. We'll make sure that we'll go back and specifically put those words in our policy.
Great, thank you so much.
And can I hop in on that too?
Sure, absolutely.
Sure. So what happens when you're developing these renewable energy projects is very early on in the process, you have to prepare what's called an environmental social impact assessment. And so that actually has to look at, what species are affected, what are the impacts on migration, and you have to do something to make sure that you're addressing whatever the impacts are to species that might be located close to a project or whatever. So even even though it's not necessarily specifically contained in the language of the Green New Deal, by virtue of doing these renewable energy projects and having to do those ASEAs, they're called, you're addressing that concern.
Great, thank you for that. Our next question, does the creation of a public bank require legislative changes? What does it require?
Okay, so this is Mark Armstrong, and yeah, there's definitely legislation that needs to be passed in order to create a public bank that would be owned by the Commonwealth of Virginia. It would be set up as an independent entity with its own governance, and so there's a lot of discussion as to what that entity would look like. Some of the governance issues that come up. How do you make it democratic in order to make sure that public finance or public banking, which would be an arm of public finance, is democratic and is not basically catering to already wealthy individuals, and also that it's funding the Green New Deal projects. So there's in the kind of overall vision for the public bank, it has to be written down as to what the values are and what the priorities are. And so a lot of that would be reflected in the initial legislation, but that would be at a fairly high level, but there would be governance documents that would need to be created as well. So yes, it's definitely a big development for the state of Virginia, but you know, it's been done before in the state of North Dakota. They passed legislation to create their public bank of North Dakota with just a single paragraph that was in a bill. This is back 100 plus years ago, 101 years ago. But it can be done legislatively, and once you do it, then there's a lot of other things that need to fall in place.
Great, thank you. All right, any additional questions? Drop them in the chat. Otherwise, we will wrap up.
If I may, I just wanted to address the one comment that was in the chat about the health disparities that are within rural communities and how you know, that hasn't really been addressed in a lot of the government response to the healthcare issues that we're having. And I think, you know, that has to do with a lot of our healthcare system right now, which is why, you know, a lot of us on this call, especially, are probably for a Medicare for all system, because it would address that issue of why is there no health clinics being built in rural areas? It's because it's not profitable, right, for those healthcare companies and those hospital systems to build out in places where they might not have as many people in you know, more urban areas or suburban areas. And, you know, that was one of our issues, I think, right now, is that we're not addressing that public health crisis in a way that is equitable for everyone. You know, we're focused more on the population centers, and what we're doing is leaving out people who are you know, who may be covering vast amounts of square mileage, but also have all of the same problems that people do in urban areas, right? And that, I think, kind of draws that rural-urban divide even more when you're talking about the fact that there's just no investment happening out there. And that's what I kind of tried to say with, you know, building these projects. What we would be doing would be, you know, bringing those to the areas that are most impacted by our economic crisis and also this healthcare crisis, and bringing those people in to do those jobs, and bringing people on from the areas will generate that type of tax that would be able to, you know, pay for public education, hopefully pay more for public health offices, pay more for just public infrastructure in general to be revamped and to be kind of almost repaired. Because right now, if you look at it, we're just, you know, we have broadband issues out in rural areas, you know, as in addition to these healthcare issues. So the more investment we have into those areas, and this is not obviously just in rural areas, but this is also in a lot of communities of color and Black and brown communities as well. the air quality is just leading to higher amounts of respiratory illness and higher amounts of other types of lung illness. So we need to be investing in these communities more. And I think that that is the overall goal of the Green New Deal. And I think health care coverage should go hand in hand with that as well.
Can I jump in as a follow-up to that and one
yes,
other?
please, absolutely.
Okay. So one of the nice things about renewable energy is it doesn't have to be located next to a population center, right? Like the solar resource all over Virginia is great. So that gives you the opportunity to locate projects close to the communities that need job opportunities and need, access to training and things like that. And with wind as well, the wind resource is located where it is, right? The wind in Virginia is mostly along the western border. So a lot of the projects would be in more, communities that are not quite so populated. And then you've got offshore wind, which is located across the coast, right? Which is more where you have bigger population centers. So the projects themselves have to be kind of spread out, and it's an opportunity to sort of, as Matt was saying, to zone them to create economic opportunity in the communities where it's needed. And then there was the question on recycling too, and I just wanted to follow up on that. So recycling is actually something that's starting to happen within the renewable energy space with developers and these renewable energy companies to start looking at recycling solar panels, recycling batteries. Older batteries are being repurposed for new applications. So the industry is very much focused on minimizing waste and making sure that we reuse the resources that are there. I mean, everybody is really trying to make this as a sustainable industry as possible. So, waste management is a key function of the project planning, right? So, even though these projects would be going into wherever they're needed to create economic development, it's not like the project goes up and then that's it, right? It's about managing the whole life cycle of the project.
And Aisha, if I may say before we close up here,
Sure.
I just wanted to, we're going on almost 2 years in building this coalition. It's been so heartwarming to see this. When I entered the General Assembly, this will be my 8th session going in now. It was so frustrating to see so many powerful, well-funded special interests. And what would happen is people would come into my office with their social justice ask or criminal justice ask, and the environmentalists would come, and then you'd have the union members come, and everybody would be begging for their crumbs. And the problem is that the reality is no one piece is big enough to impact the substantial change that has to happen. And so the Green New Deal, what was exciting, it wasn't a reinforcement of the environmental justice goals that we've got to bring. It was the fact that we had an opportunity and an excuse to build an intersectional movement. And so that's where Lee and Karen have done such a phenomenal job with all of these workers here in moving us forward, because we have to be able to overcome this frustration. And the only way to be able to do that is intersectionally. So I hope as we think about all these marginalized voices that are clearly not big enough in and of themselves to move us forward, that we see the real value is not in the information that we're changing, but the relationships that we're building.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that's a great way to close us out. Before we all go, and we appreciate you sticking around, please remember the call to action at the end of the film. You'll find the talking points available available on the form that's in the chat. We just appreciate your time. Also, that form will help us contact you and connect you with the working groups that you're interested in. Thank you all so much for coming, and please be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Green New Deal Virginia.